By this point, Hercules must have been wondering if Eurystheus had a personal vendetta against farm animals. A lion, a bull, cattle, birds, and now horses. It's horses. Easy, right? No problem. Wrong. These horses, they eat people. Hercules basically walked into a nightmare petting zoo. Yes, literal carnivorous ponies that make Black Beauty look like a horror film. Hercules has to wrangle them, which sounds less like a heroic feat and more like nightmare rodeo. So, Eurystheus once again called Hercules in for his next great idea, and this time he told him, "Bring me the mares of Diomedes, that's all. No directions, no safety tips, just another fetch quest." But here's the fun twist. Diomedes wasn't just some random horse breeder. He was the king of Thrace, a rough northern land, and he was the proud owner of 4 very special horses. Special in the absolutely horrifying sense. These weren't graceful, noble steeds that you'd imagine pulling a golden chariot. No, these were wild, untamed, and had a diet that would make Hannibal Lecter raise an eyebrow. They ate flesh, human flesh. That was their preferred diet. Anyone foolish enough to wander too close was promptly stomped, bitten, and turned into dinner. And naturally, Eurystheus thought this was exactly the kind of errand Hercules should handle. Now, the origin of these horses is a little fuzzy, as myths tend to be. Some say they were a gift from Ares, the god of war, which makes sense since Ares was always handing out chaos-inducing pets like some deranged zookeeper. Others just described them as wild, cursed creatures. Either way, they were kept chained up by Diomedes, who probably thought it was a power move. Like, yes, welcome to Thrace. This is my throne. These are my guards, and here are my homicidal horses. So, Hercules traveled north to Thrace, which in Greek myth was basically shorthand for the wild frontier. When he arrived, he saw that the land around Diomedes' stables was already barren and eerie. People stayed well clear. You could practically hear the ominous horse whinnies echoing across the hills, like the world's creepiest soundtrack. Our weary hero didn't exactly sneak around. He marched straight up, broke the chains holding the horses, and tried to drive them off. But the mares weren't easy to handle. They were vicious, snapping, lunging, tearing at anyone nearby. And of course, Diomedes wasn't about to let someone just walk off with his prized murder ponies. So, Diomedes and his men gave chase. Here we get a mix of different versions of the story, and each one has its own strange flavor. In the most common telling, Hercules killed Diomedes himself, sometimes after a pitched fight, sometimes with no more than a quick, brutal wrestling match as usual. Then, to tame the horses, Hercules fed Diomedes' body to them. Yes, he literally tossed the king to his own horses. It was the mythological equivalent of poetic justice, and as gruesome as it sounds, it worked. Once they had eaten their master, the mares were suddenly calm, docile even, as if they'd been waiting all along for that particular meal. In other versions, Hercules didn't personally kill Diomedes, but left him to be devoured by the horses while he dealt with the king's soldiers. Either way, the story always ends with the same grim punchline. Diomedes ended up as dinner, and the horses were finally under control. Now you might be wondering, why did feeding Diomedes to his own horses make them tame? Ancient storytellers don't explain it. It's one of those symbolic things. Maybe the idea was that their hunger for human flesh was satisfied by the highest-ranking person available. So after that, they calmed down. Or maybe it was just a neat way to wrap up the problem without Hercules having to wrangle flesh-hungry horses forever. Whatever the logic, it was classic Greek myth, gruesome, ironic, and a little nonsensical. So, once the horses were subdued, Hercules gathered them up and prepared to take them back to Eurystheus. This sounds simple, but again, picture the scene. Even if they were calm, these were still enormous, terrifying animals with a history of eating people. Driving them across Greece must have been like leading a parade float designed by a horror director. Townsfolk probably bolted their doors and prayed as Hercules passed by. When he finally got back, Eurystheus took one look and once again chickened out. He wanted nothing to do with the mares. Instead, he dedicated them to Hera, which is kind of ironic given Hera's ongoing hatred of Hercules. And then, the mares were let loose again. This is the recurring theme with these labors. Hercules risks his life, accomplishes the impossible, and then Eurystheus decides, actually, nah, let's just release them into the countryside. What happened to the mares after that? Different stories have different endings. Some say they wandered up to Mount Olympus and were eventually eaten by wild beasts. Others claim they were sacrificed to Zeus. A few suggest they just faded out of the myths, their role done once Hercules had proved his strength. But what's striking about this labor is how much darker it feels compared to some of the others. Sure, cleaning stables wasn't glamorous, but there was something straightforward about it. Wrestling a bull was dangerous, but kind of funny. With the mares of Diomedes, though, the story dips into horror. It's got cursed animals, cannibalism, and poetic justice all rolled into one. And Hercules? He's as casual about it as ever. Imagine him muttering, "Yeah, sure. Feed the king to the horses, that'll do it," like it's just another Tuesday. There's also something talking about the symbolism here. Horses in Greek culture were usually noble creatures, tied to wealth and prestige. So, having a king with man-eating horses, that's an inversion, a twisted parody of royal power. It says as if the myth is saying, look what happens when rulers misuse their gifts from the gods. You end up literally consumed by your own greed and cruelty. Of course, Hercules probably wasn't thinking that deeply about it. He just wanted to get through the job and move on. And speaking of moving on, the next labor would once again take him far and wide, all the way to retrieve yet another prized animal from a faraway land. Because clearly, Greek mythology loved nothing more than sending Hercules on extended road trips.